Okay, I'm back. It's been way too long as usual, but I started my engine for the first time, and then I got sick, like almost deathly ill for 2 weeks, and had to put off working on the plane for a while. But since I've recovered, basically, I've chased down a lot of the little remaining pieces that are left to the puzzle, and the engine is finalized. We're all set on that. There's just a few configuration things that I'll talk about. Anyway, today I want to talk about, let's see, my engine start, the finalization of my brake lines, my doors, a little bit about upholstery, and then a few things that I've sort of chased down in the meantime since I last did this. So here we go. Okay, first thing I'll talk about is this last thing I had to do before I started my engine. So technically speaking, you can start these engines without a prop, but there's like a weird oscillation that can take place if there's no load on the actual end of the engine. There's apparently a fix to this if you like run it up at a really high RPM. But you want to keep, from what I understand, it's not good to start it without a prop. So I had to make sure I had this prop finalized, and that was not an easy task. I reached out to Nick, and he helped me out a ton on getting the parts, but the really great benefit of these Luga props, this is an NR prop or a Luga, or there's another name for them, I can't remember. Kiev is the name of the prop company. They're in Ukraine. They have really awesome, sweet carbon fiber props that have a lot of, like a wide chord, a lot of static thrust, but there's not really good customer support. They're actually not very expensive for a prop. They're not certified. They don't have good customer support. So I had to basically chase down all these parts by myself and figure it out by just reaching out to people that I know. So that being said, I bought a 55 millimeters prop spacer from Duke Propellers. Just got that. I got that a while ago. It comes with drive lugs that are on the end that fit into the back of this hub. And at first, I thought that they weren't going to fit all the way, and I had to turn them down. But once you put it under the full torque load, it presses into the aluminum and there's no problem. So before I did that, I also had to buy these threaded drive lugs that go on the back side. And these are actual lugs that go into the prop spacer. So there's lugs from the prop spacer, or from the prop flange to the prop spacer, and then from the prop spacer into the prop hub. So there's these big drive lugs. I'll put a link to both of these, the prop hub, which I got from Aircraft Spruce, and the prop drive lugs, which I got from another place I can't remember. I'll put a link up to those, but that was really good to find those. Now, the prop bolts, because of this 2-inch spacer, you need to put these massively long, I believe they're 150 or 145 millimeter bolts, and the provided ones weren't long enough. So I reached out to Nick again, and he said he got them from Fastenal. So I called Fastenal, or I tried to order it on Fastenal, and they said it was like a special order item. And I had to have like a special business account, so I ended up just buying them from a different source. But they're, I believe, grade 12. I'm going to double check on this, but grade 12.9 hex head bolts that are 145 millimeters long that I got from Fastenal or some other hardware provider, and they work great. Now, because I'm going to have to adjust the pitch on this occasionally, I didn't want to put the nylocks on the back of this, and you can't put nylocks on the back of this because unless I had a longer bolt, there's no way to lock these hubs, these drive lugs. So I just put, Nick said he used Nordlocks, which is a special washer. So I used Nordlocks on not only the actual tightening flange, but also on the main hub. So Nordlocks will be able to be loosened and tightened again without affecting the integrity of the bond. So I just pitched it to like the medium setting, and it'll be a whole process to get the actual pitch set to the right setting that I want. And I'll go through the ranges of that eventually. But I had to get this on before the engine would start. That was sort of the last big project, which seems like a small project, but it was definitely a big thing to chase this down. That being said, it'd be a lot easier if I had chosen an Airmaster or something that was more established. You pay a premium definitely for the certified or sort of name brand props like Kato's, but they're expensive. So this is a great prop. It's actually really smooth, which a lot of people are like, oh, it's so rough. The two blade's so rough, but I mean, just running it on the ground, had no problems. We'll see what it looks like when I put it through the paces here soon. So, taken care of. Moving on to the next. Before I started the engine, I wanted to be sure that everything was properly configured so that I didn't blow anything up. And one of the biggest things, well, let me just say that I took what's called the Rotax IRMT certification class with Lockwood Aviation down in Sebring. Totally worth it. I did 3 days of classes. I did Monday, Tuesday, and then Friday. So Monday, Tuesday, this is a typical 1 week course. Monday, Tuesday is line maintenance items, and Wednesday, Thursday is for A&Ps to do heavy maintenance. So they pull apart carbs and pull a head off, do all sorts of stuff like that. And then on Friday it was fuel injection specific training that I took for the 912 IS. Now they didn't really talk much about the 915 because there weren't really anybody there who's had experience with them or was really interested. I think there might be a different course, but I covered basically everything there is that you need to know from a basic line maintenance standpoint and installation standpoint to deal with these 912 IS. And I'm technically certified in the eyes of Rotax to do maintenance on these engines. I don't have an AMP, but I can do these work. So a lot of really important things that I learned from that. One of the most important takeaways is this engine cannot tolerate loss of oil pressure at all. I mean, it's seconds before you start throwing rods. And the oil pressure purge in my last video is a very important step before I started it. And I'm glad I went to the class because I learned a few extra tips to make sure that everything was done properly. Right off the bat, in the actual service bulletin that Rotax issued, they said first indication of pressure is all you need to show to purge the system. But according to Lockwood, they like to push it all the way up till pressure peaks and then stabilizes. So I ended up running this up to about 45 PSI using a different technique. Instead of hand spinning the prop, what you do is, of course, you pull spark plugs, but in this case, you want to pull all the bottom spark plugs because lane A controls the bottom spark plugs. And so I pulled all the bottom spark plugs and I turned lane A off. Oil pressure sensor is on the lane B side of the computer, of the ECU. So I pulled all of the lane A ones and turned off A so that the ignition is not firing an empty spark, and pulled all the spark plugs off the bottom so there's no resistance. And then I sat in the cockpit and ran the starter, and it just spins really easily because there's no resistance from the spark plugs, and ran it to purge the system again all the way up to I stabilized at 40 PSI. And of course, fuel pumps were off. Fuel pumps have to be off during that, or else you might actually inadvertently start it. I just turned the fuel pumps off and just run lane B only, and then turn it over, holding momentary start power on the G3X until I got oil pressure indication and then stabilization. So I purged that through, then went and double checked all my cable routing and wiring, and after I did the class, made sure everything was, any pressing questions that I had, which I can't remember any off the top of my head, but learned all sorts of tricks. And then once I felt confident that I had checked over everything and it was sort of up to spec, I ended up firing it up. So this is the video of the first start. Ready?
3, 1.
Ready? We're going now. Clear. Clear.
once.
It did fire on the first turnover, but it ended up dying because the idle was set so low. I think this prop is pitched a little too aggressively, but I brought the idle up a little bit. I wanted it about 1500 RPM. And then once I got it beyond there, it ran, no problems. So the start procedure for me was start it, according to Dean at Lockwood Aviation, this is what I've been told. I started it, I ran it for 30 seconds, and that's it, and you turn it off. And I came up and filled up the coolant, because as it's pumping coolant through the system, it ends up filling all the lines, and it takes more coolant than you initially put in. So that's what I did. I filled up the coolant. It did take quite a bit of coolant the second time around. Checked the oil, started again, ran it for 30 seconds. Did the same thing, third time, started again, and ran it for 30 seconds. And then by that time, everything had stabilized. I still probably need a little bit more coolant. I'll run it again. And I didn't really have time to run it anymore after that, so I put it away and then got sick. I haven't really done anything since. So all in all, I'm super impressed with the fuel injection and also, of course, Nick's harness. Everything just worked basically right out of the box. Of course, I've configured everything properly, but really, really easy setup. And after going through the whole maintenance required for all the carbureted engines, I'm really glad I don't have the carburetors, because I don't like carbs. They're a lot of work, and this is, sure, it can be mystical sometimes because it's electronic and you don't have full control over the physical nature of what's going on. But I'm glad that I have this fuel injected engine. So super excited that the engine's running. It's a big feat for me to actually have that happen. I was gonna do a taxi to just taxi it around, but I didn't have my brake lines finished. And so that's the next thing I'm gonna talk about. I actually just yesterday finished my brake lines, bled the brakes, and I can, in theory, confidently drive this thing around the barn, which might happen this week. I don't know, I might take it for a spin. Okay, so I just finished bleeding the brakes yesterday using this bleeder, which I'll put a link up to, and this, mil spec 5606 hydraulic oil. Okay, so it seems to be generally agreed upon that bleeding brakes from the bottom of the system is the best way to bleed brakes. So that means you hook up some sort of pressurized system to the bottom of the caliper. There's a little, basically a bleed port, is what they call it, and then you pump fluid all the way up through the system into the reservoir. So I did that, never bled brakes on a plane before or a car, just on a bicycle. There's definitely a lot of moving parts in this one that I had a hard time with. So right off the bat, this is the dual brake kit that has two sets of master cylinders. The brake routing comes from the caliper to the parking brake valve, and then into the co-pilot brake master cylinders, right and left. Then it goes over to the pilot brake master cylinders, right and left, and then it goes up into the reservoir, and that's where they join again into a single port. So you basically have to run brake fluid through the co-pilot master cylinders to get them to the pilot cylinder, master cylinders, and then they have to go through the pilot master cylinders to get up into the reservoir. I had a really, really, really hard time getting fluid to go through the co-pilot master cylinders to the pilot master cylinders, basically to cross the plane into the other reservoirs. And I was doing it by myself, made a massive mess, spilled fluid everywhere, but I ended up figuring out that the trick that did it for me was just slightly depressing. You pump the co-pilot pedals a little bit and then slightly depress them. I basically disconnected my hoses until I saw fluid spewing out of it to the other master cylinder. Eventually did that a bunch of times, like reaching across the plane, holding the pedals on the co-pilot side, and then turning on a valve, waiting for the fluid to start spewing out of the top, and then frantically closing the valve, and so that it didn't make a huge mess. I made a huge mess, got them bled. Now I actually do have pressure in the brake system, like really solid pressure. I mean, these pedals are hard pedals, is what they call them, instead of a soft pedal, so they work pretty well, and I've tested them out. Unfortunately, my seat's being finished for upholstery. I took it to a friend of my dad's who's doing upholstery work, because I couldn't get my upholstery to stick, so I can't taxi this thing around until I get that back, but we'll do that this week when that's done. Not a big deal. Okay, I want to go over the brake system that I finally finished. I worked with Steve at Aircraft Specialty on all the hoses on the plane, and I'm going to do a video covering every single hose that we've worked with. They are available as a kit from him. He has basically all the measurements, and so if you want this plug-and-play kit, then you can order it from him. But let me just cover what it is. We've got a PTFE line, stainless braided, solid aluminum fittings so they won't corrode ever. And it's got this sort of plastic coating on the outside so that the stainless doesn't rub on anything. So that's all the hoses for brakes. They're AN3. They come up the gear leg. I'm just holding them in place with grip lock ties. That's lightweight, and I think that's how I'm gonna keep them. Usually they use tape. Some people cover their gear legs. I'm not covering mine, so these will just be out and exposed. So it comes in. I just poked a hole in the fabric and just have the cable, or the hose coming through. So it's gonna come in, it's gonna go underneath the floorboards, which are not in, comes through the center console, which is not in also, and to the brake valve, or the parking brake valve right here. So that's parking brake off, parking brake on. So then it goes through the valve. Of course, this is coming backwards, so it comes into the co-pilot master cylinder for the right-hand side, to the pilot, or sorry, to the top of the co-pilot master cylinder, then it goes over to the other side. Of course, for the right pedal, it comes in the bottom, comes out the top. I run through the back of the center console, then across through here, then to a T that I bought, and this is an AN3 adapter that runs all to the master cylinder, which is mounted on the firewall there. Okay, this was my old brake system that I put in. It was sort of I called it Frankenstein, and even it kind of looks like a Frankenstein system. The new system is all homogeneous. This is a mix of like Naca and stainless braided stuff, and the new system is all homogeneous from Steve. I didn't really understand the difference in quality that Steve was talking about. I got all these things from Jegs. This is an Earl's Speedflex line. It's just a stainless braided line. I didn't understand the quality difference between the fittings and then the actual hose until I got hoses from Steve at Aircraft Specialty. And I actually have an example I can show what the difference is. All right, so this is the Earl's Speedflex line. They're honestly really nice, and it's way nicer than what Kitfox provides with the kit, which is just the standard, kit, whatever you want to call it, the Teflon tubing that everybody uses. So this is the Jegs one, Earl's Speedflex line from Jegs that I have. I saw the whole system. If somebody wants to buy it from me, I'll sell it to you at a steeply discounted rate. It's still good, but one of the things that Steve brought up is that these are stainless plated, and if you live in a humid climate, the outside of them will start to corrode. They won't be necessarily compromised on the inside, but it'll just be an aesthetic thing over time. These fittings aren't solid stainless, so they may have problems. Now, the one that Steve's has are unbelievable. Definitely a lot more expensive. This is a solid stainless fitting here, so there's no opportunity for corrosion. It's probably the same stainless braided and PTFE lining, but this has sort of like a plastic coating. See if you can see it in the camera. It has a plastic coating on the outside so that the stainless braids aren't actually exposed, and that keeps it from rubbing on the fabric in the airplane, and it also keeps the stainless from getting grit and grease and grime in there and sort of breaking down the stainless over time. Already you can just totally see the quality difference, and I'm 100% satisfied that I just bit the bullet and decided to scrap my system and move on. So all that being said, if somebody wants all these hoses, they're AN3 hoses, and they're all the lengths basically necessary for an entire Kitfox system, plus some NICOP tubing, which is already pre-vent. It can all be replaced if you wanted to. I'm happy to sell it to somebody. But what I recommend you do is go to Steve at Aircraft Specialty and just buy a new set of these really nice hoses and call it a day. I'm not going to talk more about the hoses too much or bleeding. I'll do a specific video about every hose that's gone into this plane that Steve has put together for me, just so everybody knows what the kits are like and that they are available, because Steve has really helped me out, both from a consulting standpoint and making sure everything's properly run, and he's helped me design a system that I'm really confident in, not only from brakes, engine oil, coolant, and that's it. Brakes, engine oil, coolant, and fuel lines. So brakes, engine oil, coolant, and fuel, I feel very confident about my hoses for the life of this plane. Whereas if I had done it, maybe with the more affordable, just sticking with the kit, definitely would have been cheaper. But I thought the extra peace of mind and stability in the hoses just made a big difference. And hey, I mean, they don't build normal aircraft with, they have to use certified hoses. for a reason. They just hold up better. All right, enough about hoses. I'll talk about a few of the remaining things that I've chased down since I've recovered from my bronchitis. Yeah, I did get bronchitis, and no, it wasn't COVID, which is kind of hard to believe. You know, we've been sort of overwhelmed with this whole COVID thing, and yes, you can still get bronchitis, just normal bronchitis. That it really was hard on me, and I'm still struggling with some respiratory problems. But I did get a few things done. I've got my doors on and mounted. Gas struts are functional. So they close and they open, just like that. And they're all nice and dandy. That was really easy, just follow the instructions. And I'll show you guys some close-ups of how this is spaced. I just had to make sure like the gas strut had a little bit of extra stroke on the bottom of the, there's basically a measurement of the compressed length of the gas strut. And then you basically have to have the eyeballs slightly further than that measurement so that when it closes, there's room for it to basically lock it closed. And yeah, I'll do some close-up shots so that it's easier to understand. My removable door hinges are still removable, but it's really difficult to get them out because they're really tight. So I'm gonna have to deal with that sometime down the road. Right now I'm just gonna keep them on, but it is possible to pull these on and off. It's easier to pull them on and off than it is to like unscrew everything. So I can just pull the pins. It takes a lot of pressure to get the pins out. So I'm not really sure what I'm gonna do, but eventually I will solve that so that these will pop off. You know, not pop off while I'm flying, but I can pull them off easily without too much work. Weather stripping went on easy, and I did end up doing the VHB tape, and I used the riv nuts that Brian Bowen did, and so I put all these in. I'm still debating putting Loctite on. They say specifically don't get Loctite on the acrylic. What I'm probably gonna do is pre-Loctite, whatever this is, 15 screws, and then replace them all one at a time. But for now, I don't think it's going anywhere, and the door is actually taped on. So the odds I'm gonna lose 15 screws at once, it's slim to nil, and even if it did, there's tape. So I'm just gonna not worry about the Loctite for now. So that's doors, which are finished, except for a striker plate, but yeah, I mean, these are functional. I mean, one thing to consider with the doors is there's no way to lock this. Maybe I should say this, but there's no way to lock this that Kitfox provides. So, you just have to rely on the gas strut holding it in place. There's a trick to get the other side locked, but maybe, there's somebody out there who has a solution for that, because it would be nice to have the peace of mind. What I'm planning on doing is just getting a padlock and chain for the stick so that nobody can just fly off with it. But it's still, these things don't have a key like, your typical 172 does. Okay, one little tidbit I forgot to mention in the past, something that I had accomplished a while ago. The firewall, there's nothing in the manual about this. It's definitely something that you had to figure out on your own. There's stuff in the forums. But this firewall flange down here had no way of being attached. It was just sort of flopping. So what I did was I fabricated these little channel pieces and put, this one doesn't have a nut plate in it, but I put a nut plate in the middle of it. So there was a hole, basically I riveted a nut plate in there and then glued it into the channel where the brakes are mounted. And then I could then put a screw in to mount the bottom of it. So that holds the bottom in place. There's a quick little rundown. I only use 3, one in the middle and one on each end, and that's definitely sturdy enough. Ooh, look, there's brake fluid dripping, gross. Finally got my Naca ducts in my boot cowl. So they're carbon fiber. I'll put a link to the ones that I use. They don't fit the curvature, so I had to fill a lot of this with high sol, but I just today glued these actual duct ports in. I didn't want these, because it ended up adding a lot of cost and then workload. But the Kitfox panel comes with the holes cut for eyeball vents. So either put dummy eyeball vents in or you go through this motion. So I went through the effort of putting this in. I just, mounted it in a place that seemed reasonable, eyeballed the hole, cut it out, and then you sort of mount this ball in where you want it and then cut the hole out. Actually, I cut the hole out and then mounted the ball on with high sol. So these are good to go. One thing that's been taking a lot of my time is I've been filling these gaps for the boot cowl and on the cowling to body work it so that it has an even gap all the way around the plane, and getting this thing ready for paint. So this boot cowl, after that's done, is ready for final paint, which I'm going to do this week. Cowling, same thing. Been putting a ton of time into these. I mean, a ridiculous amount of time getting these right. I finally cut out this hole in the middle, And then because I had to, the cowling didn't fit together when I got it. This had a flap that was supposed to go underneath the nose. But so what I did, I had to cut it off because it wouldn't fit. But I ended up filling this gap in with high sol so that it's nice and smooth, and body worked it. And then I glued this little tab in, and that's going to actually be where I mount the two together on the nose. Otherwise, the sides are all glued. I put some paint on there because it helps me show where the highs and low spots are. But this is going to be a nice, smooth, even gap down the whole side that I filled in with high sol. So yeah, tons of body work if you want to do it right. I mean, I could have just bit the bullet and said, no, I'm not doing any more body work. But if you really want these to look pretty, this is just tons of hours of work. And this has honestly been the most of what I've been doing for the last 2 weeks, basically, is cowlings and boot cowl, which is, I don't find to be very enjoyable because I get covered in fiberglass. Got my stencil for my tail numbers. Went with the 12-inch so that I can get into Canada. Otherwise, they won't let you cross borders. So 12 inches if you want to cross a border. It's good to know. So basically the last things I have left are the paint on the flaperons, which are primed and ready to be painted. And then I have to rig the flaperons once they're painted. They say in the manual you're supposed to wait, so I'm waiting until paint to do my final rigging. And then paint for all of my fiberglass components, wingtips, cowlings, and then like stall fences, and then tail access cover, stuff like that. I've already epoxy primed, and that stuff's ready for its urethane coats. This week, I have gotten all my paints in finally. And then upholstery. I tried to do my own upholstery. Couldn't figure out why it peeled up, and talked to the guys at an upholstery shop. They're a friend of my dad's, and they, it turns out you're supposed to rough up the surface just like you would prep it if you were doing, fabric work, covering it with polyfiber. So that's something I didn't do. So the aluminum is really hard to get to stick unless you Scotch-Brite it. And then same thing with the smooth fiberglass for the seat pan. It didn't stick for me. So I gave it to those guys. They charged me, whatever, their shop rate to fix what I did. And they say it's sticking so far. So would have been nice to know ahead of time. There's no instructions for upholstery. They just give you the kit, and you're gonna have to figure that out on your own. At least there might be instructions in there, but I haven't seen any. I'll go look again. All my wiring's done though. Everything's configured on the G3X. Engine runs. We've got all our hoses. Brakes are ready to go. Rudder's in and ready to go. Gear and everything are all ready to go. So this thing is pretty much, I know I've said this before, but this thing is, it's really on its last steps. Lauren, who's up in Alaska, has flown his Kitfox for the first time. Way to go, dude. Super awesome to see that actually go up in the air, and I'm really excited to be right behind you. You got your kit, he got his kit 1 week before me, I think, or maybe 2 weeks before me. So I feel like I have another maybe week and a half left for us to have been on the same track. But there's a little bit of pride. I'm super stoked for Lauren to have that up and running, and we talk a lot about getting through some of this stuff. He's been super helpful with me, and one of the things that he said that I also agree on is that this last, 5% is really painful. There's like a lot of tiny things. I'm really tired of buying stuff from Aircraft Spruce, and I'm tired of waiting for it's just exhausting to get this last little bit done. But powering through it, and we'll have our first flight here hopefully within the next month, and I am sticking to that. As long as I don't have to leave to go to work, which it's looking like I can dodge, end of the month, we should have this thing at least taxiing on the runway. So thank you everybody for sticking through this build process so far. Sorry, the videos have been a little bit less frequent. It's been busy, and then this thing is just, this thing's so hard right now to chase down all the little stuff, but it's been a great process. I've learned a lot, and hopefully everybody else is learning, along with me in these videos. So hope you're enjoying the content. I'll keep it coming, and yeah, see you guys on the next one.